The room was silent. Cameras clicked. Pens paused mid-air. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood still behind the podium, his face calm but unreadable. The summit was meant to be diplomatic, just formal talk between world leaders. But something had shifted. Moments earlier, Donald Trump, with his usual smirk, had turned slightly toward Traoré and said, "Africa's always asking, always kneeling." The words didn't echo. They stabbed. You could hear a chair creak. Someone gasped quietly. Traoré leaned forward slowly, his eyes locked on Trump like steel magnets. No notes, no teleprompter, just truth. Africa will never kneel again. Silence cracked, a murmur spread, then a roar. Journalists dropped their pens. Some stood, unsure why. A young delegate from Ghana began to clap. Then Nigeria, then Haiti, then South Africa. Traoré didn't blink. He continued. "We are not what you think, not beggars, not broken, not yours." It was the most unplanned, unscripted moment of the summit, and the world was about to watch it 10 million times. Across the internet, phones lit up. Africa had just stood up, and it started with one voice. What the world saw was a bold man on stage. What they didn't see was what lived behind his words. Traoré hadn't planned to speak that way. In fact, he'd come to the summit tired, angry, and carrying a deep hidden wound. Just 3 nights before, he had visited a village in northern Burkina Faso, destroyed by a militia group trained with Western support. Mothers sobbed in the dark. Children clutched photos of fathers who would never return. One girl, Aissatou, ran up to him barefoot, eyes wide with tears, and asked, "Why do they hate us?" He had no answer. He just hugged her, holding back his own pain. So when Trump mocked Africa on the world stage, he wasn't just responding as a leader. He was speaking for that girl, for the graveyards, for the stolen minerals, for the silence the world demanded from Africa for generations. That's why he said it with no script. Africa will never kneel again. It wasn't politics. It was personal. And that's what made it unstoppable. Traoré's voice had cracked not because he was angry, but because he remembered Aissatou. And so did the crowd, even if they didn't know her name yet. The air had changed. You could feel it. Not just in the building, but across live streams, radio waves, WhatsApp groups. In Lagos, kids replayed the clip on cracked Android screens. In Paris, African immigrants wept watching it on train platforms. But inside the summit, something happened that no one expected. A chant started, soft at first. One voice in the back whispered, "Africa." Then another, and another. "Africa, Africa, Africa." Within seconds, the room was thunder. Flags waved, suits came undone. Even world leaders known for silence stood clapping, some in disbelief, others in surrender. Trump tried to interrupt. He reached for his mic, but the sound was drowned. The crowd had taken over. A CNN reporter tried to summarize the moment live, but her voice cracked. Tears streamed down her cheek. This isn't just a speech. This is something bigger." Traoré didn't smile. He bowed his head once, quietly, then raised it again. "We're not against you," he said. "We're just no longer beneath you." The words exploded online, and far away in a dusty village, Aissatou watched on a neighbor's TV, her eyes wide. She smiled and whispered, "He remembered." Across the ocean, in a quiet Brooklyn apartment, a woman sat frozen in front of her TV. Her name was Fatoumata, a Burkinabe immigrant who had spent 20 years cleaning houses in New York. Her back ached, her hands were worn from bleach, but her eyes were full of something new, pride. She watched Traoré speak, her hands covering her mouth. Her son, Malik, came running from the hallway, confused. "Mama, why are you crying?" She pointed at the screen. "That man, he's from where you are from." Malik looked, then sat, then stayed still. His tick-tock never came back on. Fatoumata whispered, "He said what I've been too tired to say." For years, she had worked silently. She had smiled when employers mispronounced her name. She had nodded politely when people said, "Africa is so poor." She never shouted, never answered back. But now, someone had. Not with anger, but with dignity. Tears flowed, not from sadness, but from recognition. Because for once, her homeland wasn't a punchline on the news. It was a headline. And she wasn't invisible anymore. Neither was Malik. Something was waking up inside Africans across the world. Back in the summit hall, Traoré sat down quietly. Cameras still flashed. Delegates stared. Trump avoided eye contact, but Traoré's eyes drifted down, not at the media, but toward a small, wrinkled note in his jacket pocket. It was folded 3 times. Fragile, worn. He had carried it for 5 years. It was from his older brother, Adama, who had died during a 2015 protest in Ouagadougou. He had written the note the night before he was killed by a stray bullet. "If I don't come back, don't bow to anyone, not even fear. We were born to rise." Traoré kept that note next to his heart, even in military armor. Even now. He touched it, just once, then looked up. He could hear the chant still rolling through the hall. It wasn't noise, it was memory, pain, resistance, and Adama's voice lived inside it. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about every African silenced too soon. And in that moment, Traoré didn't feel alone. Neither did Aissatou, nor Fatoumata in Brooklyn. It was as if the ancestors had joined the summit, quietly taking their seats behind him. Africa wasn't just standing, it was remembering. In a quiet corner of the summit press area, a tall man in uniform stood still. Captain Daniel Ross, a decorated U.S. Marine, had been assigned to security detail. Born in Mississippi, trained in Iraq, and stationed in multiple African countries, Ross was a seasoned soldier, but now his hands were trembling. He stared at Traoré, still processing what had just happened. He remembered a boy in Mali who gave him water during a heat-stroke mission. The boy had no shoes. He smiled anyway. He remembered a woman in Niger who fed his squad out of an empty home, whispering blessings in a language he couldn't understand. He remembered how he had been told over and over that Africa needed help, yet he had always been the one helped. Now, hearing Traoré say, "Africa will never kneel again," something shattered inside Ross. "Damn," he whispered. "He's right." For the first time in his career, he stepped forward, not to guard, but to honor. He stood at attention, not ordered, not forced. And the cameras caught him, a U.S. soldier, standing straight, not in protest, but in respect. That image, it would soon circle the world and silence even the loudest critics. Thousands of miles away, on the steps of Place de la République in Paris, African immigrants gathered beneath fluttering flags. Someone played Traoré's speech on a loudspeaker. Strangers stopped to listen. Some stood in silence. Others wept openly. Among them was Mamadou, a street cleaner from Mali. He wore a neon vest. Dust clung to his face, but his eyes were locked on the words echoing through the square. "We are not what you think, not beggars, not broken, not yours." He sank to his knees, not in worship but in relief. He had fought silently for years, against racism, against invisibility, against shame. Every time someone looked through him, he swallowed it. Every insult, every job rejection, every whispered slur. But now, a man in uniform had said everything he never could. A French woman in her 60s walked over. She placed a flower on the step beside him. "I saw it too," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry." They didn't say much else. They didn't need to. Because for the first time in decades, Mamadou didn't feel small. He felt seen. He felt something rising, not just in him, but in all of Paris. Inside a secure wing of the summit building, Traoré sat alone in a break room. Security guards had cleared the hallway. Cameras weren't allowed in. Then his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to pick up. "Hello?" The voice was quiet, cracking. "Captain Traoré, my name is Angela Thompson. I'm an American journalist. I was in Burkina Faso when my convoy was attacked." Traoré's face stiffened. He remembered the file. 3 American journalists, 2 dead, 1 missing, presumed gone. I survived because a group of local farmers risked their lives to hide me in a grain pit. They didn't speak English, but they fed me, protected me, told me you'd one day speak for us all." Silence. Then she added, "Today I saw you speak, and I just wanted you to know. You did." Traoré closed his eyes. He hadn't known about the farmers. He hadn't known they saved her in his name. But now he did. And the weight of that truth made his heart feel both heavier and lighter. Because his speech hadn't just gone viral. It had saved someone's life. Back in Ouagadougou, a teenage boy named Jibril sat in a noisy cyber cafe. He wasn't watching TikToks for fun. He was uploading. He had clipped a part of Traoré's speech, added subtitles, music, and posted it under one title: "Africa will never kneel again." Then the screen glitched. The power cut for a moment. The Wi-Fi flickered. "Please don't delete," he whispered. When the cafe rebooted, the video was there. 8 views. He sighed, closed the browser, packed his bag, walked home in the dark. What he didn't know was that 5 minutes later, a South African influencer reposted it. Then an artist in Ghana remixed it into a song. Then an Algerian news network aired the clip live. By midnight, it had 2.6 million views. By morning, it reached 41 million. And by sunrise, the world wasn't just talking about Traoré. They were talking about the boy who posted the clip. Reporters flooded Jibril's cafe. His phone rang for days, but all he said was, "I just wanted people to feel what I felt." And they did. Because emotion travels faster than signal. Traoré had faced bullets. He had walked through villages still smelling of smoke. He had buried soldiers who called him brother. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. He shut the door to the dressing room and leaned on the wall. His body finally let go. His hands shook, his chest trembled. He slowly slid down the wall, knees bent, eyes staring at the floor tiles like they were enemy territory. For the first time in years, he cried. Not in front of cameras, not in front of soldiers. Alone. He cried for Adama, who should have been alive to see this. He cried for Aissatou, who lost her father to a war she never started. He cried for the countless unnamed, unburied children he had seen over the years, little arms poking out of rubble, mothers screaming with hollow voices. And yet, here he was, not a savior, not a superhero, just a man trying not to break in a world that demanded strength. Suddenly, a knock. "Captain, you're needed back. Something's happened." He wiped his face, stood up. He had no time to fall apart. Not now, because what waited outside would shake the world again. Traoré walked into the hall expecting another press update. Instead, he was shown a leaked email thread from an African delegate on the summit panel. Subject line: neutralize Traoré's speech before it spreads. It was real, verified, sent just minutes after Traoré left the stage. The delegate? A West African minister backed by foreign investors. His betrayal wasn't loud. It was silent and sharp, like a whisper in a snake's ear. "He's stirring up too much unrest," the email read. "We need to remind the world Africa's still cooperative." Cooperative? Traoré's jaw clenched. So it wasn't just outsiders trying to silence Africa. Some voices came from inside the house. He stared at the name on the screen. A man he had dined with the night before, smiled with, trusted. Now that man was trying to erase his words. The security advisor stepped forward. "Captain, we can expose him." But Traoré paused. "No," he said. "Let the people expose him. Truth doesn't need a bullet." He turned and walked away. The minister didn't know it yet, but by the next sunrise, his name would trend for all the wrong reasons. Africa wasn't just awake, it was watching. In a remote village in Burkina Faso, Aïssatou sat on a wooden bench, wearing a faded pink dress. The village teacher had wheeled out a donated TV with a dusty solar battery. Children surrounded it. And then, Traoré's face appeared. She gasped, "That's him!" She pressed her hand to the screen. He spoke again. "To every African child who's been told to shrink, I say this: grow louder." The kids clapped, but Aïssatou didn't. She just sat still, eyes wide, whispering to herself, "He didn't forget me." Because she remembered the night he came to the village after the attack. He knelt beside her, promised change, promised safety. She had nodded, not believing him. Now, she believed. Across the world, millions saw her face in a video captured by a volunteer. She wasn't posing, she wasn't aware, but the still frame went viral. The girl Traoré fought for. People donated, posted, organized. One tweet read, "You've made us all cry, little one. You are what this fight is about." And so, unknowingly, a child became the symbol of a continent's rebirth. That night, Traoré sat alone again. Not in a summit hall, not behind a podium, but in his hotel room, beneath a flickering lamp, with pen and paper in hand. He was writing a letter, not to the UN, not to the world, to Aïssatou. "You don't know what your face did to me," he began. "When I saw you in that village, I wasn't a president, I wasn't a soldier. I was a man who had failed to protect his daughter." He paused. That line hit him harder than he expected. He stared at the ink blot spreading beneath his pen. Truth was, Traoré had a daughter once. Her name was Zara. She died from a treatable infection at age 3 because the clinic had no antibiotics, all exported to Europe. He had never spoken of her, never let the world know. But every time he spoke of African children, he was speaking to Zara's ghost. He tried to finish the letter, but his hand wouldn't move. The pain was too raw. Instead, he folded the half-written page, placed it in his jacket and whispered, "This fight is for both of you now." Then he wept. Back in Burkina Faso, thousands had gathered in Ouagadougou's Revolution Square. The rain came down in sheets, yet no one moved. They held flags, some homemade, some torn, some stitched from school uniforms. A boy no older than 9 stood barefoot in the mud, holding a cardboard sign, "Africa will never kneel again." The wind blew, the rain made it soggy, but he didn't let go. Across the continent, candlelight vigils sparked. In Soweto, in Nairobi, in Freetown, people gathered, not to protest, but to honor, to stand. Old men who had fought in forgotten wars cried into their fists. Women carried their babies wrapped in flags. Children whispered Traoré's words like gospel. And still it rained, because real change doesn't wait for weather. And that night, across the skies of Africa, something unseen moved. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement, one forged not by anger, but by grief, memory, unity, and in every tear that fell from the clouds, it felt as if the ancestors were crying too, but not in sorrow, in joy, because after centuries of silence, Africa had finally found its voice. The final day of the summit arrived. Security was tighter. Cameras were everywhere. World leaders avoided Traoré, unsure whether to shake his hand or fear it. But he walked calmly, the unfinished letter still in his jacket. As he approached the microphone for closing remarks, a European delegate whispered loudly, "Let's see what the boy king says today." Traoré stopped. He turned, looked directly at the man. "Call me what you like, but don't mistake my calm for weakness." He faced the world again, and then he did something unexpected. He pulled the wrinkled letter from his pocket. "This was meant for a little girl in a forgotten village," he said, "but it's really for all of you." He read the words slowly, voice breaking, not as a president, but as a father, a mourner, a man. And as he finished, silence swallowed the room. No applause, no chants, just eyes filled with water. Even Trump, seated nearby, didn't speak. Because how do you argue with truth that bleeds? Traoré stepped down. The room didn't erupt. It rose, quietly, one by one, in silent respect. For the letter, for the loss, for the love, and for the Africa that refused to kneel. A month passed. The speech had faded from the headlines, but not from the hearts of millions. And one day, a journalist traveled to Aissatou's village. She asked the little girl, now recognized across the continent, "If you could say something to Captain Traoré, what would it be?" Aissatou blinked, looked down, then looked straight into the camera. "I would tell him, thank you for standing when my father couldn't." The interviewer choked back tears. "Why do you think people listen to him?" Aissatou smiled gently. "Because he spoke like someone who lost something, and people who lose something always speak from the heart." The video was uploaded the same day. It exploded. 10 million views in 1 week. Even people who had ignored the original speech were now watching. Why? Because the world doesn't cry for speeches. It cries for truth. And one little girl had just reminded the world what that looked like. Across every comment section, "I haven't cried like this in years." That child said what no politician could. "I feel like I can't breathe after watching this." Africa hadn't just risen, it had healed something. Traoré returned home to silence. Not celebration, not parades, just news that hit like a stone to the chest. His mentor, his old commander, General Sanu, had passed away. Heart failure. He'd been sick but kept it hidden, not wanting to distract from Traoré's mission. The funeral was quiet, private, no cameras, just soldiers, family, a folded flag on a wooden coffin. Traoré stood over the grave like a statue, not blinking, not moving, until the final shovel of earth landed. Then, he broke. He fell to his knees, not out of weakness, but out of total surrender to pain. He had lost too much, and yet the world demanded more. A soldier moved to help him up, but Traoré shook his head. He needed to stay there for a moment. On the ground, because every African who had ever knelt out of loss, he needed to join them, one last time. And then, he stood up again, with mud on his knees, eyes red, and he whispered what would become his last public words for the year. "I will carry this weight until my last breath." And everyone watching felt it. 6 months later, a new summit was held, this time in Ghana. No U.S. presidents, no foreign moderators, just African leaders, community builders, farmers, artists, children. And in the middle of the room, a flag, not of one country, but of a new Africa. A journalist asked Traoré if he had more to say. He shook his head. "No more speeches. Now we build." Behind him, Aissatou walked onto the stage, dressed in white, holding a candle. She placed it beside the flag and spoke 5 words that made history. "Africa now stands for us all." Cameras clicked, but this time it wasn't for drama. It was for documenting a beginning. The screen fades to black, then the words appear. "In honor of those who never saw freedom, but planted the seed for it. If your heart is heavy right now, If your eyes are full, if you feel like something woke up inside you after watching this, then don't scroll. Like this video right now. Comment Africa stands if you felt the power. Subscribe, because this channel isn't just telling stories, it's telling our truth. Let the world see we're watching, we're rising, and we're never kneeling again. Africa rises. Traoré legacy. Emotional truth.